the recording. And we're recording this presentation so that we'll have it available on our website so that it can be accessed at any time. Again, I've compiled a slide set to walk through some of these big components, things that we regularly receive questions about, and then there will absolutely be time for questions at the end. So please feel free to drop questions into the chat at any point, and we'll take it from here. So as a quick overview, we're going to talk about just the basics of finding programs, and then really spend the bulk of the time talking about understanding different program components. So things like prerequisites, what might be similar and what might be different, as well as some resources that you can use. Talk a little bit about critical assessment and reflection, which are really some of the core components of this part of the process in order to figure out what are the best programs for you to apply for, given all of the information that you've sort of thought about and analyzed for yourself. So as a quick disclaimer, these are opinions and perspectives that are derived from a lot of years of working in the field of genetic counseling, and I just want to say clearly that these are not guaranteed to result in admission or enrollment, and are really just one framework for ways to consider this, not the only way to consider it. So felt like important to sort of start out that way. So starting with the very basic first few steps is locating programs to consider, and then we'll talk about ways to navigate the materials that you encounter once you find them. So this is probably, seems a little foundational, but there are a couple components that I wanted to draw attention to. So starting at the very top, there are a couple of legitimate ways to identify accredited genetic counseling programs. And you'll notice that I have accredited more than once on the slide here, because the accreditation piece is actually really important. In order to practice as a genetic counselor, you need to graduate from an accredited genetic counseling training program. That should be easy enough here in North America, because all of the programs are accredited. And if there is a program that you come across online that you haven't come across through this website, it is an accreditation requirement that programs post their accreditation status online. So if you do not see accreditation status on a program site, then that should be a flag to you that it's likely not an accredited training program, and therefore you would not be eligible to sit for the board exam with a degree from that program. So when you go to the program directory, and I've included the link here, I'm happy to share it in the chat later as well, through the Accreditation Council for Genetic Counseling, or the ACGC, which is the national organization that gives programs accreditation, you will see a list of active programs. And then you'll also see 3 types of accreditation associated with those programs. The first one is full accreditation, and I think on the website it just says accredited. Full accreditation is an 8-year time period, and that means that the program has gone through detailed self-study and review and has met all of the criteria to the highest standards, and therefore has received the fullest accreditation possible, which is 8 years. The other category that you'll see at this point is full, new program. And what that means is that a program submitted all the documentation and the plans that they needed in order to receive new program accreditation, but they have been open for less than 4 years with students. So new programs have instead of an 8-year period, it's a 4-year period in which they'll go through detailed self-study and make sure that all of the components that they had planned for meeting competencies are actually meeting the competencies in the way that they had intended. So then once they go through that, after year 4, they would then receive full accreditation status or probationary accreditation status. If you're looking at the website right now, you won't see any under probationary status, which is great news. Basically, the probationary status just means that through the course of review, there's something that came up that requires additional attention and additional sort of intervention. And so the institution is working on making sure that all of the standards can be met appropriately. You'll also find a program list on the Association of Genetic Counseling Program Directors website, or the AGCPD. AGCPD is a little bit of a misnomer in its title, in that it's not really just program directors, it's essentially program leadership. from all of the programs in North America, but also for places that are developing programs. So you'll see different degrees of membership on here. And all that really means is if you sort of scroll all the way to the bottom, if you see an associate membership, that might be where future sites or future programs are going to be developed. In terms of North America right now, there are 55 accredited programs in North America, 51 in the United States, and there's one program under development. The one program under development is in Arizona State. And so if Arizona State receives accreditation before March 1st or March 15th, then they will be eligible to participate in the match cycle this time around. So that might be something that comes online. So there may actually be 56 programs participating in the match in the spring instead of 55, depending on when Arizona State receives its eligibility. And at this point, there are no other programs that have declared eligibility. I created a really quick map that to try to give an idea of the landscape of what this looks like. And I'm going to just pull over the actual website to make it a little bit more interactive. So what you'll see at just sort of first glance is that not every state has a program. And there are several areas of the country where there are long distances between programs. There are also some areas of the country where there are programs in clusters. So for example, in New York, even though it says 6, when we zoom in a little bit closer, it's that there are 2 in New Jersey, 2 in Philadelphia, and 4 in the New York region. I'm happy to share this link in the chat as well. This is just something that I created using this Mapline website and the addresses of the programs that are listed on those sites. So this is in no way proprietary data or anything along those lines. But I thought it was really helpful to get an idea of where the programs are physically located, because geography is something that often a lot of people use when they're initiating their search. And there's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's something that I did when I was trying to figure out where I wanted to go. And I think there's often a lot that aligns for people beyond their initial geographic search. And we're going to talk about things to pay attention to and look for that might be informative for you beyond your initial geography. So once you've sort of located the programs, you now have the challenge or the task, depending on how you want to view it, of understanding those programs. I didn't specifically say differentiating the programs, but there's a lot, because there's a lot that's similar. So let's talk about some of the areas to look at when considering programs. One of the things that I've found in my time in the field is that the more program websites you look at and the more categories of programs you consider, the more things look the same and the harder it is actually to tell what is different across programs. If we step back from this for a second, there's actually a really good reason why this is the case. And in some ways, you want it to be the case. The primary reason for this is that there are published national standards for the field of genetic counseling. These can also be found on the ACGC website, and they outline the topics that accredited programs must cover during their programs. So since the most recent version of the standards was revised and became effective in 2019, all programs are following the same guidelines at this point in time. So if you sort of want to look through that document, the standards are compiled into a 30-page document. Again, it's publicly available. So to see an outline of the criteria that programs need to follow with regard to administration, curriculum, instruction, fieldwork, evaluation measures, and many other areas of program management. The standards themselves are based on the practice-based competencies, which are the minimum skills an entry-level counselor needs to demonstrate to be eligible to practice in the field. The practice-based competencies cover 22 different areas in 4 domains. The 4 domains are genetics expertise and analysis, interpersonal psychosocial and counseling skills, education, and professional development and practice. So the highest number of those competencies is sort of focused in genetics expertise and analysis, as I'm sure you would imagine. 6 of them are in the interpersonal skills, psychosocial and counseling skills, 3 of them in educational skills, and 5 in professional development and practice. And the thing is that all the programs want to remain accredited, and their significant components of the programs are the same. And if you think about it from the patient perspective, you would actually want this, right? You would want, if you were in the patient role, to know that no matter where your provider was trained, they have the same skills and knowledge as any other provider. So what does it mean for you, right? If everything is the same, then how are you supposed to tell the difference? The first thing is I'm going to sort of focus on the things that are the same and are not likely to be that helpful. So the first is that the curriculum is rarely going to be a clear differentiator. It doesn't mean that there isn't a difference. It's just that it's hard to find the difference when you're looking at curriculum alone. I think sometimes students will find, oh, a program has a certain course title, something like, let's say, medical ethics. But because of the standards and the practice-based competencies, whether or not a program has a course entitled something doesn't mean that the content isn't there. It's just sort of what is the institutional label for this course. So just looking at curriculum pages is not likely to take you as far as some other areas. Geography in and of itself, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, will likely be a differentiator for you, depending on where you are comfortable searching geographically, but it's not necessarily a differentiator for programs. Programs in similar geographic regions often vary widely from each other, and there may be programs that are more similar in totally different areas of the country. So for example, at the sort of, for many years, UNCG's sort of closest program mirror was Brandeis in Boston. So totally different regions, but more similar in sort of their setup than some of the other programs around us in the Southeast. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a couple of slides. Websites, like the course descriptions, are limited in what they can and do host sort of publicly. Course descriptions are limited to like 30 words, and it's almost impossible to cover everything that would be covered in a course in 30 words. So it's relatively generic. If you truly want to know more about a specific program, you're probably going to have to contact them. And frankly, I think that's a good idea for everybody too. When you are doing your research, you want to go way beyond, Googling and looking at a website to find sort of some of your most powerful tools. So the resources are not just online or media-based resources, but you should utilize real people. Use alumni of the program, use friends, use people who are going through the process, or recent current students, use practicing counselors. Talk to them, learn what they were looking for in a program, learn what they consider program strengths to be, whether it's program that they went to or a program that they work with now as a supervisor. There's also a lot of really interactive online options. The past couple of years in particular, this is certainly one example of that, but there's also, the virtual career fair hosted by the Western Regional Genetics Network. Several programs host information sessions or weeks or introductory days, and often in connection with other programs. So you have the opportunity to interact with more than one program at the same time and to interact with representatives of that program, not just a website. So once you start digging in, a clear place to start is prerequisites. Clear, I should probably put a little asterisk in, because although to my knowledge, every program has prerequisites, what counts as a prerequisite is different by program. So some examples of these include advanced genetics, biochemistry, statistics, embryology, introductory psychology, or perhaps some other coursework like public health or sociology. The programs themselves are the experts here in what they will and will not accept. So as an example, advanced genetics may have different definitions at different programs. Some places will or will not accept human genetics versus molecular genetics. Biochemistry is something we get a ton of questions about at UNCG. So we require 1 semester of biochemistry that in and of itself requires 1 semester of organic chemistry. We do not require a lab. There may be some programs that require associated lab. The reason for the specificity here for us as it relates to the biochemistry course itself is because of the content and the level of content that a biochemistry course that requires organic will be sharing versus a biochemistry course that does not require organic as a prerequisite. So just sort of taking organic chemistry separately and then taking a biochem that doesn't require organic doesn't meet the prerequisite. The biochem has to require organic for us. And the reason why we do that is because we don't have a separate standalone biochemistry course. The biochemistry content is infused and embedded throughout our courses. And so since we're not sort of starting from scratch, teaching everyone biochemistry, we need to make sure that the students coming in have exposure to more advanced and rigorous content versus for us something embryology. We do have embryology as a part of our plan of study. And so all of our students start taking embryology. So we don't need embryology as a prerequisite, but that's not necessarily the case for all programs. So it's something to take a look at, particularly if you don't have all of these courses in your undergraduate coursework and may need to take additional courses before applying. One thing that comes up somewhat regularly is survey courses. Some programs accept survey courses and other programs don't. And some might even sort of land somewhere in the middle and say, we'll accept it on a case-by-case basis. If you are reviewing prerequisites for a program and have a question about whether or not your coursework fits into that prerequisite for the program, ask. Just send an email or call the program and try to talk to somebody about whether or not what you have as your coursework satisfies prerequisite requirements. It will save you a ton of time and effort, potentially money going through an application process if what you have does not necessarily align with what they're looking for. So what else might be different? One category to pay attention to is the structure of the program. So an easy place to start is where the program is located within the institution. And I don't mean sort of what's the building address, but what is sort of the academic component of that. So some programs are housed within medical schools. Some are housed within schools of public health or departments of genetics or departments of biology, which are within schools of arts and sciences, or some like us are housed in schools of health and human sciences. This often influences the type of research or capstone requirements that are associated. And it may also influence the types of rotations or the lens through which the content is viewed. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. No one area is specifically harder or specifically easier or is better or worse than the other. They're just different. Cohort size is another thing that varies. It's not uncommon for programs to start with a smaller number, like 4 to 6 students, and then build as they are able. The average cohort size nationally is just under 10, it's 9 point something. Some programs are much larger with 20 students or more per cohort. And again, none of these are inherently better or worse. It's not better or worse to have a small cohort or a large cohort. The question is, what is better or even best for you as a learner? Course structure and delivery refers to both the days of the week courses are held. So for example, our courses 1 day a week, 2 days a week, 3 days a week, 5 days a week. Does it change from the first year to the second year? Are you in classes, 4 or 5 days a week in year 1 and 2 to 3 days a week in year 2? Is it all the same? Are all of the courses in person? Are some of them in person and some of them are virtual? Are they all virtual? Are the virtual courses synchronous? Are they asynchronous? Those are all things that could be different by program. And rotations can occur in many different forms. So I think when people say rotations, they think of sort of these full-time rotation experiences, but actually the terminology of rotation or field work can mean a lot of different things. So some programs start interactive clinical rotations right away, where students are participating in cases in the first semester. Others, like ours, start with observational rotations right away and build rotations as the skills are built. So moving from observations to initial experiential interactive rotations like pedigrees in the spring of the first year, and then moving into full-time rotation opportunities in the summer. The types of rotations can also vary. So some programs have telehealth rotations or non-clinical rotations like laboratory or research rotations, or multi-specialty rotations. It's part of the standards that all graduates must have a variety of cases with no single specialty dominating. So you can expect that all programs are going to have rotations, and that all of those rotations will cover core clinical subspecialties of prenatal, pediatrics, cancer, and adult. So you can expect that to show up no matter where you look. And lastly, the length of the program also varies occasionally. So most programs at this point are 21 months, which is 2 full academic years with the summer in between, but some are longer. I don't think there are any that are shorter left at this point in time, but it can be variable. One of the things before I move forward that doesn't change is that because match is universal, all programs will start in the fall. So there are not spring or January starts for programs. There may be late finishing and graduation, but not late starts. And that's because of the universal admissions process. So with regard to philosophy and approach, as I mentioned briefly before, while the content has significant overlap, the philosophy or the lens through which the content is viewed may be different between programs. This is not likely to be specific to like molecular genetics or psychological theory, but more associated and influential components like aspects or tenets of public health, medical models or teaching models or other types of models. So as an example, at UNCG, we consider that we have a holistic approach to genetics and genetic counseling, where absolutely we are teaching and talking about the core molecular components and the psychological theories and the counseling skills, but really we like to go sort of beyond that into the interconnectedness of it. So how all of those aspects, including things like social determinants, influence an individual, influence a family, influence a community, and ultimately come together to sort of impact and what impact genetics and genetic conditions have on a person as an individual, a family, and sort of people overall, from sort of the cellular level to the community level. Beyond that, I'm sure I don't need to tell you that costs are a thing that can vary. Some things to keep in mind are state institutions versus private institutions. So state institutions have tuition rates that are set and are often have variable rates for in-state or out-of-state students depending on residency, whereas private institutions likely have set rates that are regardless of residency. Some state institutions have the ability, or some states, depending on where you live, to receive in-state tuition after a period of time, like 1 year. So North Carolina is a state that is open to residency after 1 year. So you can come here, establish residency, and have in-state residency for the 2nd year of the program. And there are other states where that process is not allowed after 1 year. So even if you became an in-state resident, you wouldn't be eligible to receive in-state tuition. Some states also have reciprocity agreements. So in some of the areas where there is not a state program, there are, on occasion, states that will say, if you attend an institution in another state, you can attend at an in-state level. I don't have a comprehensive list of where reciprocity exists, but that's something that you can explore if you are living in a state that does not have a program. Assistance options also vary really widely. Some programs don't have assistance to offer. Others have things like graduate assistantships, which are almost like a form of work study with stipend and tuition waiver, scholarships, grants, or other financial awards. They might be single year awards, they might be single year first year, single year second year throughout the entirety of the program, or just one single award, for example, at the time of match or in the first semester. So you might be thinking, well, what do I do? So we're going to start by considering priorities. I'm going to walk you through some examples of that. Then step 2 is research programs that fit those priorities. So absolutely, you can start with program websites and social media accounts, and then move to some of the interpersonal components. And then using that step 3, making contacts, whether you start with program faculty or students or alumni, you attend some of the virtual events, have the opportunity to interface with representatives of the program, that will help to inform your perspectives. So this is one of the most critical parts. You need to take the information in front of you and truly consider what it means for you, sort of reflect on it, and then take action. So I compiled a short list of questions to start asking yourself. Before you get too far down the rabbit hole of website searching, I would recommend that you start at the very beginning. And so if you were with us the last time, welcome back. And if you have not watched that, one of the big questions was, is this a good time for me to start a graduate program given what else is happening in my life? So presuming at this point that the answer to that question is yes, then considering some other things, ultimately this is likely to work out best for you, and particularly with regard to answering questions in interviews or putting together personal statements and reflective essays, if you know what you're looking for. So asking yourself, what are my priorities? Are my priorities geography? Are my priorities content focus? Is it course delivery or course structure? Is it cohort size? Is it city size? Is it affordability? Is it the cost of living in the area where the program is? Is it transportation options? There's so many, and they're very personal, that's something that you need to answer for yourself. The question, what am I looking for? Please don't say, I'm looking for a good education or I'm looking to be a genetic counselor. I'd like to think that by this point, one of the big take homes is that no matter where you go in North America, you're going to get a great education and you will be a great genetic counselor. It's not really about that. You have to go a little bit farther than that, right? That's the standards are in place to make sure that you get a great education. So go back to your priorities list. Take a look at things like social support, connection, opportunities. Take a look at that list and look at it critically and ask yourself why you want that. Like, what is the thing why is it, what's informing that idea? So if you say, I'm looking for support, I'm looking for social support, why is it that you're looking for social support? And what does social support look like for you? Sort of what are the ways that you're open to receiving social support? So for example, if you say, one of my priorities is geography, ask yourself why that is. Right? Why is geography important to me? Maybe it's that you want to be within driving distance of a family member or a partner or a friend. And the reason that you want to be within driving distance is because their geographic proximity to you is crucial for you to feel supported, and that you need to feel supported to be your best student self. Then, okay, great, you're clear, geography it is. And so then you need to sort of clear out all the rest and focus on a geographic area, and then really get to know the programs within that geographic area so that you can figure out which of those programs is the best fit for you, because they're likely to be relatively different. So what do you need to succeed? What kind of supports do you need? And if they're social, as we just mentioned, if they're financial, if that's related to tuition or in-state or out of state, then you want to make sure that you're really focusing your application materials and your networking on places that meet that criteria so that you have a good understanding that it's a good fit for you. And ultimately, that will allow the program to be a good fit for you and for you to be a good fit for the program. So it's sort of mutually beneficial. You're not the only one involved here, though. And so certainly there are a lot of questions to consider asking programs. This is not an exhaustive list in any way, but one of the things I think that you can and should consider asking programs is about what they consider to be their priorities or their values. If you can engage with current students or recent alumni, maybe what the program is looking for in applicant candidates, as well as a reflection, at sort of what are they looking for to help inform that reflection of their priorities and values. What's considered a competitive application or a competitive applicant? Do they have specific criteria for experiences, like the number of hours that someone has to shadow a genetic counselor? I hear that one a lot. We don't have a specific number that is associated with shadowing genetic counselors, but it seems as though there are programs that do, although honestly, I couldn't name them. So that's something that you would need to explore on sort of a case-by-case basis. You can ask more detail if you're interested, or if a priority or value for you is things like rotation experiences or research opportunities or laboratory exposures. Go ahead and ask more questions about that than beyond what you can find on the internet. And it's also okay to ask something that is informational but less direct, like what makes you proud. In all honesty and transparency, I always find it a little odd when people ask me what makes the UNCG program different. And I spent a fair amount of time reflecting on that, like why is that question striking to me? And I think it's striking to me because I don't consider that I or we, like myself as a program director, or we as the UNCG genetic counseling program, or even we as the broader training programs across the country, are specifically trying to compete with each other. I understand that in some ways we are, but that's not our goal. We ultimately have the same goal, right? The same goal is to train great professionals to be of service to patients, and to be of service to the general public. That's what we want, right? We want the field to continue to grow and to be filled with people who can bring their perspectives and come into the field and sort of bring who they are into the field, not necessarily, because any one certain program has had a significant, influence on who somebody is. So we're not trying to work against each other in a lot of ways. We're just trying to be the best versions of ourselves. So questions like this, like what makes you proud, I think speaks a little bit more to what a program is doing or hopes to do than necessarily trying to pit a program against another program when we're all sort of working towards the same goal. So if we're going to consider this as a process, this would be our time to sort of circle back, assess, and reflect again. I didn't include locate programs on this list because it's relatively straightforward. We already walked through how to do it, so that piece is actually already done. You're going to go through the personal process of identifying your priorities, obtain information from programs, and consider how the responses line up for you between what you identified and the information that you received. Ask clarifying questions, reach out to other programs if you're not finding what you're looking for in your initial search, and then assess again. And once you get to that point, then you can decide, okay, this is where I want to focus my time, energy, and resources in applying. I mentioned this in the last, I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in the last session, but on average, there does not appear to be any sort of statistical advantage to enrollment beyond the range of 4 to 6 program applications. Most people end up applying in that range that end up enrolling, and there doesn't appear to be any significant advantage over that. And certainly there are many, many, many people who enroll having applied to less than that. That's just sort of retrospective data that I share here in case anybody was curious, but it shouldn't necessarily be what guides your decision making. So that is the core components that I wanted to cover today. We have a session that's in just a short couple of weeks where we're going to talk in depth about experiences. We will talk about experiences that programs are typically looking for, where to get them, what to consider when you're selecting them, and then perhaps just as important, or maybe more importantly, how to package them in a way that communicates your experiences to admissions committees through a resume. That is something that I probably give the most feedback about every single year. So we're going to put that all together and focus that in our next session. It's its own session because there's a lot to say about it. In October, we'll talk about additional admissions materials like personal statements and letters of recommendation, including who to ask and how. And then in November, we'll just have like an open Q&A about the program. I did want to have one other quick plug, which is if you are planning to apply this cycle, registration for the match is live. If you're not familiar with match, I have more information in it in our last session. The match registration is required in addition to individual program applications. And that occurs through the NMS website, and the link is there for you. At this time, there's also an application to have the match fee waived, and the match fee is $100. That application will be reviewed and results are sent by the end of October. The requested process is that you apply for a fee waiver before registering for the match, and then once you've received the donation, then you can proceed with registration, and there would be instructions on how to do that if the fee itself has been waived. All of that information can be found on the NMS website, and the match fee waiver application, I think, closes October 6th. So if you are interested in applying for that waiver, it's open now and you can apply at any time. And that is all that I put together. I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you might have if you want to drop them in the chat. I am happy to sort of hang out and answer questions for a while.